So this presentation is on early childhood biosocial development. It's a rather long one, but we'll go through it pretty quickly. It's pretty important. Now we're talking about kids beyond the age of 2. What we see is growth patterns. The kids become taller and slimmer. Each year of age, between 2 and 6, they're well nourished. They add about 3 inches of height and gain about 4.5 pounds in weight. Their center of gravity now is moving downward away from their head, from the breastbone to the belly button. Nutritionally, children eat far fewer calories per pound of body weight than infants do. And of course, obesity can be a problem. Overfeeding can be a cause of an epidemic of this illness of obesity, such as heart disease and diabetes. Children in low-income families are especially vulnerable to obesity. This is partly due to where they live at, the food deserts that some children live in, that is not having available foods that are healthy and wholesome. So there are efforts around the world, especially this. You can see this child in England battling obesity by riding his bike. Part of the problem is not just inactivity, but and I'm a little bit of an expert on this. I've gone to a couple workshops, conferences. I did a sabbatical on childhood obesity. Some of it's what the kids are eating. So that's the biggest part of it. So you can get kids active. That's super helpful, and it makes them healthy, not otherwise physically healthy, but also they need less calories. That's the problem. And he needs to be pushing away from the table, or his parents, if that's his mom, need to help him make better choices. Nutritional deficiencies can occur. Most children in developed nations consume more than enough calories. Many customs entice children to eat sweets, which of course sometimes they have a preference for. There can be gender, ethnic, and income correlations with body fat. Estimated that 3 to 8% of all young children are allergic to specific foods, and almost invariably they're commonly healthy foods. Oral health can be a problem, especially with too much sugar and too little fiber. You get tooth decay. I've known some dentists who are pediatricians that talk about how they've never seen as many dental caries in small children. Parental childhood experiences and habits, income, all can be barriers to, and access, of course, to dentists can be a barrier to good dental health care. The hazards of the just right is important. Some children insist on eating only certain foods prepared and presented in particular ways. This rigidity is called, it has to be just right, and can become pathological in adulthood. But it starts during this time period. It happens among children, and they wish for continuity and sameness in a normal, to make their lives normal. Indulgences and patience for just right becomes destructive, as well as leading to overripe children. They need to eat and try different foods. So you can read some more about the just right phenomenon. And this is the age period where it starts and really can become problematic. Brain development, by the age of 2, the child's brain weighs about 75% of what it's always going to weigh, which is amazing. Extensive sprouting and then pruning of dendrites takes place. The brain reaches maturity during the time period we're talking about now at about 90% by age 6. Social understandings develop as prefrontal cortex, super important part of the brain, and emotional control improves. Incidentally, this prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until the early 20s. This just gives you some diagram of where the prefrontal cortex is. This often is a part of the brain that's injured with head injuries. And the inner part of the brain, the midbrain, is what gets myelinated, especially the fibers that cross, called the corpus callosum. It's on the right-hand side of the slide. This often helps lead to what we call hand dominance or preference. The speed of thought by myelination improves. So you go from a relatively uncoordinated child in the previous period to one that has much better coordination, because their myelin is between the two hemispheres is taking place. Brain development shows the brain becomes faster and faster. This cross-section of an axon with a dark middle coated with many layers of Schwann cells as more and more myelinated wraps around the axon. This happens during this time period. So this is not a time to skimp on good healthy foods. It's a time to have a good healthy diet with this child. The corpus callosum, of course, is a thick band of axons that connects the hemispheres and leads to lateralization, where one side of the body becomes dominant over the other. Invariably, this happens. In our culture, most kids tend to be dominant on the right-hand side. Left-handed children, it's partly genetic. I know in my family, my wife and one of my children and one of her grandparents and one of her parents were all left-handed. Many cultures support right-handedness. I remember as a child in grade school, in a parochial school, nuns made children write with their right hand. So it can be culturally influenced too. Contemporary views on left-hand, right-hand distinction, the distinction is way too exaggerated. There's no exclusive sidedness in healthy people. Both sides of the brain are really involved in every skill. And of course, the brain is very flexible in early life. It's plastic. It wants to learn and develop new bilateral skills. The maturation of the prefrontal cortex takes time. It's very limited in infancy. That's why small children can't control their emotions. And this lasts into early adulthood. Between 2 and 6, neurological issues increase, especially notable in the area of the prefrontal cortex, including planning, thinking things out, social awareness, and language, which just explodes during this time period. Neurological immaturity is another reason why adults need to prevent childhood injuries, like wearing a helmet when that child did not have a helmet on his bike you just saw a few minutes ago. Impulsiveness and perseveration occur, where because it's maturing so slowly, we focus on curbing impulses. But before myelinization, many young children jump from task to task because they just can't stay quiet. Other kids act in the opposite way, and they perseverate, where they get on one thing and they'll just stick to it. This also happens with certain types of dementia. And by the time they get through this time period, they will hopefully both reduce impulsiveness and perseveration. From ages 2 to 6, children's brains mature, the prefrontal cortex matures, and the evidence that we know this is true is they sleep better, their emotions become less responsive and more nuanced, their temper tantrums decrease and subside, and uncontrollable laughter and tears are far less common. Now we've got the influence, this down-regulating of the prefrontal cortex. Okay, so this just talks about this child sitting still, and you especially see this in church situations where a child's expected to. It may be that that she just can't because of her lack of brain development. 3 parts of the brain are important in emotions: the amygdala, which registers emotions, particularly fear and anxiety; the hippocampus, which helps process memory from short-term to long-term storage; and the hypothalamus, that responds to the amygdala and the hippocampus by producing hormones that activate different parts of the body. So the hypothalamus is super important in endocrine regulation and autonomic nervous system regulation. There's the feedback loop from the adrenal cortex to the amygdala and the hippocampus. You can check this out. There's both positive, which is the light blue, and negative, which is the red, that controls these hormones. We need to have both of those. This gives you some idea why taking hormones unnecessarily is a really risky business. Early traumatic events or stressful events increase the risk of learning and memory deficits. Sometimes in adulthood, it's seen as attention deficit disorder, post-traumatic stress, or major depression. Some of the benefits, of course, with traumatic events is that cognitive memory and memory growth with reassuring adults can be helpful. And of course, keeping this in context and duration is important too. So we want to get these traumatic events resolved quickly. There's an improvement in motor skills. Children develop motor skills spontaneously and diligently as they play. That's why play is so important. By age 6, most North American kids can ride bikes, tricycles, climb ladders, pump their legs on a swing, throw, catch, and kick a ball. Muscle growth, brain maturation, and guided practice advance gross motor skills. So you got to play with your kids. Just don't send them outside to play, especially if they're by themselves. And practice improves dexterity, which is eye-hand coordination, advances fine motor skills, especially small body movements. Remember, in the previous period, it was all about gross motor skills. Now we're talking about fine motor skills. This is the table of some of the things that kids can do. So by 4 years, they can brush their teeth, they can feed themselves with a fork. And of course, there's ranges. Some of the things that happen in a 4-year-old can happen in a 2-year-old, but they're less likely to happen. Right on up to 6 years old. Tying shoes, catching a ball. Think it's a good idea or a bad idea for parents not to insist that their kids learn to tie their shoes? Well, if you want to keep tying them the rest of your life, that's great. If you want them to not only learn a skill, but increase their brain development, then make them learn how to do it. Gross motor skills are specific skills, and they're all, again, based on brain maturation and motivation, and of course, guided practice. There's a reason that kids learning to dance need dance teachers. It's because they don't know how to actually do the gross motor skill. And of course, this is influenced by local customs and culture. There are some environmental hazards that kids and during the same period are exposed to that need to be minimized, including living in low socioeconomic areas. Asthma and respiratory problems are major issues with air pollution, but there's other harmful pollutants too, like lead in the water, pesticides in the soil and on clothing, or on food for that matter, bisphenol A, BPA, and plastic. So if you ever look on the bottom, or recycled plastic, you know what I'm talking about. And of course, the ubiquitous secondhand smoke. Okay, let's look at the difference in finger skills between using chopsticks and using a fork. Fine motor skills are more difficult to master. They involve small hand movements and finger movements, and often involve using both sides of the brain. Remember, the myelination is just happening now. It's influenced by practice and maturation, and on average matures 6 months earlier in girls than boys. Artistic expression is kind of interesting. There are all kinds of forms of artistic expression in different domains, in different cultures, and of course they're correlated with later creative drawing. So if you draw with your kids when they're little, they'll want to do it as adults. Sometimes it's bliss for the child, but not for the parent, especially when they get that messy. Sometimes unavoidable injuries happen. This is one of the major causes of injury in this age period is falling. And it happens in every income, ethnicity, every nation. You need to protect your kids. So more kids die from accidents at this age period than disease. So between 2 and 6 years old, the U.S. Are at greater risk than slightly older children who are more physically mature. Age-related injuries include falls, motorcycle vehicle accidents, not wearing a seatbelt or a car seat, poisoning, fire, drowning, and of course injury control is called harm reduction. Safety practices, car seats, bike helmets, taking medication and putting them out of reach, and of course having a pool monitor. Levels of injury prevention. There are 2 types of analysis to predict injury and prevent it. Accident autopsies and statistical analysis. The level of injury can be primary, secondary, or tertiary, which is of course the gold standard. So if you get time to study this chart, you realize that prevention measures actually have reduced injuries in children 2 to 6 by 1/3 just over a short period of time between 1990 and 2011. Other issues that happened during the ages of 2 to 6 include child maltreatment, which is intentional harm to or avoiding endangerment of anyone under the age of 18. The child abuse, of course, is a problem, deliberate action that is harmful to a physical, emotional, or sexual well-being of a child, and neglect, which is a little more difficult to show, is failure to meet the child's basic physical, educational, and emotional needs. It may be more pervasive than child abuse. Maltreatment is, when it's noticed and defined, must be reported. Harm or endangerment about which someone has notified the authorities. In Illinois, you're what are called a mandated reporter, and typically you know that if you're in a professional relationship with the client or with the child. And you need to find evidence to substantiate maltreatment that's been reported, but that's not necessarily the job of the reporter to do that. This just shows the pervasiveness of abuse. You can read the description of the child. Rates of child maltreatment vary. This is between 1991 and 2010, but the trend is still going down, even though it's happened still far too often. Reports of substantiated maltreatment increased from 1950 to 1990, but have decreased ever since. We're not really sure about why that happens. Fewer homes with small children, perhaps. The variation in professional scrutiny related to abuse. There's more people watching. Fewer children report that they are abused, or perhaps maltreatment may be underreported. Substantiated cases have dropped dramatically, with neglect being far outreaching all the others of physical, sexual, or other types of abuse. It can lead to cases in not only in adulthood but in childhood of PTSD. It's an anxiety disorder, or used to be an anxiety disorder, that develops as a result of delayed reaction to some event that would normally cause a traumatic response in other people. And of course, it can have symptoms like flashbacks, hyperactivity, hypervigilance, displaced anger, sleepiness, nightmares between fantasy and reality, and in children can be very difficult to treat. Signs of maltreatment, these are worth reading through, including injuries that are unlikely to be accidents, like certain types of bruising, repeated injuries like broken bones, fantasy play with dominant themes of violence or sex, slow physical growth, unusual appetite or lack of appetite, ongoing physical complaints such as stomach aches, headaches, etc., reluctance to talk or play or to move, especially in development, if development is slow, no close friendships, hostility toward others, bullying or of small children, hypervigilance with quick impulsive reactions such as cringing, startling, or hitting, a frequent absence from school, frequent change of address, frequent change of caregivers, and the child seems fearful, not joyful as compared to other in that age group. The consequences can be long-lasting and devastating. Often these children regard people as hostile and exploitive. They are less friendly and more aggressive and more isolated than other children. They experience greater social deficits and may experience large and long-standing economic consequences from the abuse. The three types of prevention include primary, which focuses on macro systems, such as large systems, stable neighborhoods, family cohesion, decreasing financial instability, like finding jobs or employment, family isolation, and teen parenthood programs. Secondary prevention includes focusing on identifying and intervening, like, for example, what would cause this kind of problem, like insecure attachment. And tertiary focuses on limiting harm after the maltreatment, so it's sort of after the fact. These could be programs in neighborhoods to make families aware of abuse. Tertiary prevention includes permanence planning, foster care, kinship care, and especially in Illinois, adoptions.